Hello, my name is Kurt Wahlner, and for about the last 20 years or so, I've been doing these ridiculously elaborate architectural drawings that I'd like to share with you right now.
I started out with rather modest pen and ink affairs, usually done while I was waiting for something to happen.
And then somebody said the fatal phrase, "Gosh, these would look great in color." I was very accustomed to working in black and white as a graphics designer, and my sense of color was needed work. But I started in and started working in color. While eviscerating buildings in this format, I always thought that the Mount Everest of drawing would be to draw some of the works of Frank Lloyd Wright, who is an architect that I admire a lot, and his work is incredibly complicated. And I wheedled my way into being able to see a couple of properties in person, starting with the May House in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Michigan, right. And I drew that up a couple of years ago, and then I also was able to get in and take pictures of and reconnoiter around Wright's famous design La Miniatura in Pasadena that was done in 1923.
So, after working on projects like that,
I thought that doing some drawings of the White House in Washington, D.C. would be interesting. I've always liked the White House. And I think that it is probably the most photographed building on Earth. So in today's episode, I want to talk about how I do these drawings, how I go from this to this. Now, as everyone knows, everything has three dimensions: width, depth, and if I can spell it correctly, height. So the question becomes, what are the widths, depths, and heights of the White House? In White House parlance, there is the West Wing, there's the East Wing, but the center part is called the residence. Now here's a shot of the north facade of the White House straight in. And one could guess at the proportions, but I prefer not to do it that way. I'm more, persnickety about it. I can eyeball it, but because I'm going to do a lot of different things with this building, I want to scribble it all down as much as I can, as best I can. And the best way to discover the actual dimensions of the White House is to get the plans. I know where to go and look. The Library of Congress. Since 1933, the National Park Service has had a program called the Historic American Buildings Survey, where they get architectural students to run around and measure and draw historic American buildings. The White House was done during a 4-year period between 1988 and 1992 when they were stripping all the paint off the building. And these give me absolute measured drawings of the width, depth, and height. So all of that material, plus a lot of photos that they took, both the exterior and the interior during that period, are at the Library of Congress online. But they're only of the residence. To get plans of the West Wing and the East Wing, we'll have to go elsewhere. So my next step is to establish a grid over the floor plan. Since the Renaissance, artists have used grid patterns to scale their designs. You draw it small, and then you need it bigger on a wall for a mural, and you draw it larger. The idea is that you can draw a grid pattern really easily, and then once you've done that, you can draw whatever you'd like inside. My theorem is that when you draw the pattern, the grid pattern, in dimension, perspective, then you can draw anything that you want to within that perspectivized grid. And it's easy, it says here. So what I do is that I put a grid over the entire floor plan of the White House, and then more or less do the same thing with the height of everything. And then as long as I can draw that grid in perspective, I can draw all the things that will fit inside that wireframe, so to speak, in perspective also. We shall see. So here's the first floor of the White House from the Historic American Building Survey. It has the measurement of 168 feet for the whole width of the White House. So we get this selection rectangle, we copy that, and paste it in there. We find out that it is 8,426 pixels wide. The object of the game here is to divide this into 10-foot sections. I get my trusty calculator out. 8,426 divided by 168 equals about 50 pixels per foot. So multiply that by 10. Got 500. So now what we want to do is we want to make a 500 pixel square file and place it onto the floor plan so that we have 10-foot increments in all directions. It goes like this. We have the plan, and we drag a guide, or I like to drag a guide down to the center axis, which is the very center of the center hall, and the north-south axis, which is right in the middle of the entrance hall. Then we make a file that is 500 pixels wide. This is the new Photoshop. I'm having trouble getting used to it. 500 wide, 500 in height, and then we'll make it sort of like a blue color. Not black. Background color. There we go. That's a nice blue. Okay, so then we copy and paste that, and then we paste that in and line it up with the east-west and north-south axis. Keep pasting those in, and these represent 10-foot square sections of floor space. And this way I can begin to build my grid pattern on top of the floor plan. So then I drag guides to the edges of the blue squares. So that means that I have a guide on top of the floor plan every 10 feet worth of space in the drawing. The result will look like this. 10-foot increments all over the whole floor plan of the residence. And if I can draw a grid that is the same as these and draw that in perspective, then I can draw all of the walls exactly where they need to go. And this is the secret behind the complexity of all of this stuff. Now what I want to do is transfer what I've learned onto paper. I like to be able to refer to paper when I'm doing this, and also I need to be able to extend the paper to include the west and the east wing. So I draw the red grid pattern. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then, while referencing the image on this computer screen, I place the walls on my drawn grid, thereby replicating the whole enchilada. And that's what I need to have. So that takes care of the width and depth part. But what about the up and down part? Okay, so what I've done here is I've done the same thing for the facade, the northern facade, in that we have vertical lines spaced every 10 feet apart. I've also established horizontal lines at the ground floor level, the main floor level, the second floor level, the third floor level, and the top of the third floor. You can see that the dimensions for the this space is 12 and a half feet. Well, it's a little more than 12 and a half feet. So if you divide this into 4, you get 2.5 feet each. So 2.5 feet by 5 is 12.5. So I'm going to go with that. So that is 4 units this way, 5 units this way. On the next floor up, from the first floor to the second floor, I've marked as 8.5 units. From the second floor to the third floor is 7.5 units. And from the third floor to the top of the third floor is 4 units. So in establishing our up and down grid, we've determined that 10 feet wide, which is 2.5 feet per grid marking here, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to the first floor. And we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.5 to the second floor. Pretty tall, isn't it? And then 7.5 to the third floor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then 4 more to the top of the third floor. So this is not a grid, it's an asymmetrical grid, but it's one that I can deal with because as I draw it, I can check the proportions all the time. So here we draw an asymmetrical grid for the facade. All of the facades will fit onto this grid. I've also added another unit on top for the space between the top of the third floor and the very tippy-toppy roof of the place. And then you just draw in the facade, and there you have it. I continue this process with all 4 sides of the residence. Then too, we have to follow the same process for all of the different floor plans. I like to get in on the ground floor. So this is the ground floor on my grid. First floor, the second floor, and the third floor. So that gives us everything that we need to be able to draw the residence. But what about the west and east wings? And for that, we turn to a man named Derek Jensen, who runs a wonderful website at www.whitehousemuseum.org. It's an old-fashioned fan site filled with all sorts of historical tidbits and photos. And as part of his navigation on the site, they have clickable plans drawn by a man named Peter Sharkey. Now, where Mr. Sharkey got his information about what's in the west wing and the east wing, I know not. But they seem pretty accurate. So the best way to put this all together is to get a screen capture of the Google Maps version of the White House, and then go ahead and plop all of Sharky's plans on top of that, and then install our 10-foot grid over the whole thing. And this way we get the size of everything all together in the same scale. So now I have the entire White House complex in one convenient place. It's all put together, all with the same 10-foot grid pattern across the whole thing. This might seem like an awful lot of work to have to go through in order to get the length, width, and height of everything, but I assure you it's necessary to me. I think that the more I know about the White House, the more I can dig in and find out where things really are, the better off I am. In the West Wing, for example, Sharky's guess don't always match up with photographs that I've been able to find, and so I alter the pencil drawing to match it. So I always figure that doing this amount of reconnoitering is always worth it in the long run. I have a lot of drawings that I want to do, and this set of blueprints, so-called, will enable me to draw any aspect of it any old time I want to. I know this has been a long slog, but thank you for holding on with me, and we'll see you next time when we begin to tackle the Lincoln bedroom. Thanks for your attention. Bye-bye now.